Welcome back. I hope you had a somewhat relaxing time away from all of the frantic, manic demands of the university. And I hope you got to, I guess, I don't know, more deeply consider and feel and ponder the meaning of your first placement, how it was for you, how it felt, and what you've learned from it. I know that we kind of ask people to immediately process it right after placement. And it's like, I don't know what the hell was going on. Like, I'm just out of this insanity. Like, just give me a few days. So hopefully some of the insights into, both like, what you value from being a teacher, what your challenges are, how you want to grow and become. Hopefully those are starting to become clear for you now. Yeah. But this is not a lecture about placement or anything like that. I'm just kind of talking to you as I'm continuing to admit people into the room. Okay, I should get started though. Okay, so I decided to make this a live lecture for a couple reasons, 3 reasons probably. One is that in order to retain even a slight feeling that this is like education and that I'm a teacher, it seems like there has to be some sort of reciprocal relation I'm not satisfied with digital stuff that often, but at least this way I can see some of your faces. I can get a feel for how you are responding. I know that there's somebody on the other side. Whereas with video, it feels a lot more isolating and a lot less like education to me. So that's one reason. Second reason is because you've been away for a few weeks and I thought it might be useful to start to get something of a human touch back as a way of getting back into the program. It's been a crazy kind of couple of weeks. We're back in lockdown. There's, maybe some people are feeling isolated. So there's all that kind of stuff going on as well. But the third reason, and probably the main reason, is because the topic I'm going to be talking about today is kind of like a heavy topic. And as you'll see from how I present it, I believe that there's a need for working through this topic in community, and to just present a couple videos and have you watch them in isolation without a feeling like you're in something as a group together sharing an experience, I think might be counterproductive for the aims that I am intending. So those are my 3 reasons. I am going to share screen, and we'll go through my PowerPoint slide. Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. I wasn't sure if anyone was actually going to come to this live thing, 9:30 on Monday morning. Most of you are maybe in this mode of like, yeah, let's just get over this university stuff. I just want to get back into my placement. But I'm happy to see that you are here. I want to ask you that you use the Zoom chat sparingly. Use it for like stuff that you consider essential, that I should know, or that people should know. But don't use it just to like have this parallel chat that is going on all the time while we're speaking or while I'm speaking. I view it as the equivalent of like passing notes in a classroom, which I'm not necessarily against, but I don't think humans are good at multitasking. So there you go. I'm I'm just going to just open up my PowerPoint now. Okay, share screen. Okay. Michael and Jane, you're on my little thing on the side, so I can see you. Can you indicate to me whether or not the full screen's showing up? Okay, great. So then I assume it is for everyone else now as well. Okay, so I have titled my topic Flourishing During the Ecological Crisis. And that's what I intend to talk about today. I am interested in how we as teachers can flourish and how we can support our students in flourishing. And I think that those two are very interconnected. I don't know how well we can support our students through something as heavy as what might unravel unless we do some of the work of supporting ourselves as well. So I've got a bunch of PowerPoint slides. They're divided into kind of three main headings. The first is describing very briefly what the ecological crisis is, in case some people do not know. That's doubtful, but I'll just go over it anyways. Then I'll have a second kind of topic about the emotions that people feel during this time and will perhaps increasingly feel in the coming decade or two. It just seems to have frozen. Okay, and the third is about what we can do, potentially what we can do on for our own conceptions and our own understandings of what this moment is in the history of humanity through using our imagination, and how we can bring imagination into the classroom in our different subjects. Okay, so I'm just noticing that, yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. So according to the UN and many other international bodies, all major ecosystems on Earth are in decline. Some of these, they fear, have begun to pass tipping points. Some of them are very close to passing tipping points, and it doesn't seem like we are on the verge of slowing down. So those tipping points are very likely. What is a tipping point? A tipping point is what happens is with living systems, they're not linear. So what that means is that you can push, you can like aggravate, or you can give assaults to a living system, and it will be resilient. It will be able to prevent that assault to a certain extent. But if you pass a threshold, then it destabilizes rapidly and radically. Right. So same thing with diseases. Like we can take a small amount of a disease in our system, but after a certain amount, then there's an exponential moment where it starts taking over. So it's not fluctuations or slight increases in things like carbon dioxide or slight amount of biodiversity loss or anything like that that we're really worried about. It's when it passes a boundary point and then it leads to a runaway escalating unfolding or, collapse, right? So according to Rockstrom and his colleagues, you can see by this image, according to them, actually climate crisis, which is the one that we hear the most about these days, has passed. Red implies that it's past a likely tipping point. So it has passed some sort of a tipping point, but it isn't even seen as the most crucial issue. We've far more past that with biodiversity loss and with how we've messed up the nitrogen cycle. But you can also see that we're reaching critical points or almost reaching them with ocean acidification, the phosphorus cycle, the way we use fresh water, and with deforestation. Whereas other aspects of how we're impacting the world, such as chemical pollution, are not yet in any sort of danger zone, which doesn't mean that they won't get that way. Okay. So those are the various causes of the ecological crisis, but those causes themselves have their own causes. Okay. So there's a lot of causes and they're all interconnected, but here's a few examples. So there's economic causes. The various countries on this earth are all committed to a model of economic growth, which depends on having us be consumers of products. And it depends on most of us having jobs where we contribute to that growth model and to that consumerism. If you haven't watched the Story of Stuff video, this is a very effective video, which is created in a way which would be accessible to different age groups as well, to teenagers. There's also cognitive causes. It's like, we're not that good at thinking ecologically as humans. Most of the great things, most of the technologies we've produced, most of the science that we've created has been the result of thinking linearly, which means splitting up the world into abstracting out from most of the world, a simple cause-effect relationship. This causes this, right? And that's extremely effective. That's the basis of analytical thinking, and it's extremely effective. But ecologies operate in networks, in interdependencies, in feedback loops, and they're complex systems. And humans are not great at thinking this way. But education does not support us to understand things from this systemic point of view either. Most of the education people get in schools is very linear, is about abstracting out simple cause-effect relationships, especially in the sciences. It happens in different ways across a lot of different subjects. And third, I would say that there's psychological reasons. So even if we know that there is impending possible doom, we realize it for a moment and then we bury it, we deny it, we get on with our daily lives. Or some of us have maybe some sort of an arrogance, like, of course humans are amazing, intelligent creatures. We've solved so many problems in the past, perhaps we can solve this problem too. There's nothing we can't do. Addiction might be another psychological factor, like the economic system that we work in, that's dependent on creating us as consumers, is also dependent on creating new addictions for us, right? So all of us are dependent right now on things that nobody was dependent on 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And in 10 years, people may be addicted to new things that we currently have not even dreamed that there's a need for. Right? So we're addicted to some people say that addictions are created in order to support an economy, and that a lot of the technologies that we create are not in the service of humans, but they're in service of an economic system. So you can see that all three of these factors, and there's more factors beyond the economic, the cognitive, and the psychological, but you can see how they themselves are also interconnected. So like Gregory Bateson noted, there's feedback loops between the various causes of the ecological crisis. Okay, so the ecological crisis is commonly called the destruction of our life support system, right? So the ecologies of the earth are maintaining the air at 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, very little carbon dioxide, even though that is very chemically unstable. It's maintaining ocean salinity levels at a very specific level, maintaining soil, it's preventing soil erosion, it's cleaning the water, it's cycling carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, it's pollinating our plants that we use to eat, it's regulating the global temperature. Well, there's a small list of things that it does: detoxifying pollutants, as well as providing food, medicine, and other materials. So without these massive processes that we get for free, we wouldn't survive, we wouldn't exist, right? So it's more than just a metaphor to say that the global ecologies are our life support system, and that we are therefore destroying our life support system. This tends to be what is mainly focused on when people talk about sustainability, right? If we can just get a handle on and not destroy our life support system, we'll be able to sustain ourselves. But I would like to explore the idea that there are other things that ecosystems provide which are essential to being human. There's emotional dimensions to what nature gives us. There's aesthetic dimensions, and for some people, perhaps many people in different ways, spiritual experiences. So what I mean by this is that, like, imagine like, this is a thought experiment for you, but imagine like the life support system aspect of nature was solved, right? So it's like, okay, well, we've designed a giant machine that can do all of those things that Costanza is referring to above, right? Some giant machine. But the cost of this, and this machine will work, for sure it will work, but the cost of the machine is that it takes up the entire earth. Well, it'll destroy all of nature. But you'll be able to live in your house, you'll be able to walk to work, potentially, you'll be able to do whatever you want, but there will be no other living organisms. We're sustaining ourselves. We've figured it out, right? Technology has come to the rescue. Is that the world that we want? So if you think about what is lost in that world, what really does having trees around provide other than oxygen, or having birds, or whatever it might be, zebras? We don't talk about that loss enough, in part because it seems softer. It seems like, we got to convince people based on the hard stuff, their survival. But, my question is, what would be the point of surviving if the cost was the entire ecosystems of the earth. I know from my own experience with the lockdowns, especially the first one where people weren't really allowed to go outside, that, you know, just hanging around in a room all the time, isolated from everything, was just extremely depressing for me. And I think that in a way, something about lockdown gives us a taste of what that potential trajectory would look like. Everyone living in a bubble or something like that. So, okay. The truth is that we don't know if we can turn things around. As I said, they are, there's already runaways. We don't know what those runaways will do. And so there's a question of like, well, what do we do in education? One approach is to keep telling people about the problems, to explain, you know, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, and this is the solution, this is the solution. Well, the problem with that is that we've known that we've known about the problems and we've known about solutions to those problems for decades, and yet the system is still dead set on further destruction. So the problem doesn't have to do with knowledge, right? Maybe it in part does, but it's not just about knowledge, and it's about much more than just knowledge. So what is it about? This is something that I'm going to try to figure out a little bit with you today. I've already talked about that. When we think about, you know, whether or not there's going to be a collapse or whether or not we can turn things around, it's useful to think about, to be more careful in thinking about, well, what does it even mean to turn things around? What are we turning around? You know, so for some people, it might be a single variable victory, like, oh, as long as we can keep carbon dioxide emissions below whatever it is, 350 parts per million, say, then we've turned things around. We've reached sustainability. Yeah. Other people might be pointing to the UN's SDG goals or something like that. For other people, it might be a fundamental change to the system that we're in. Okay. Part of the complications with uncertainty about what turning things around might mean also involves uncertainties about what the ecological collapse really means. You know, so some people think it means, well, the ecosystems will collapse, but civilization powered by technology will carry on with business as usual. Other people would think something more like the civilization will collapse, but in the end, the ecosystems will be fine. I mean, they might take a hit, but they're going to recomplexify over 1 million years with or without us. So what are people afraid of? Are afraid of what are they? And it's important to try to unpick that. So you might think that this really has nothing to do with education in any obvious way, but it really does. Because like the reason people like Greta Thunberg and all those, the climate change movement and all of that is bubbling forth is because there are these stories going around. Like there's these ideas that, hey, maybe humans are going extinct. Hey, there's a biodiversity crisis right now. Maybe civilization is going to collapse. And these aren't just stories that are going around in people's imaginations, right? These are stories that are like increasingly based on scientific models. A survey was done in the UK recently, and it's like 45% of people in the UK believe it's likely or highly likely that humans will go extinct in the 21st century. In France, the rate is the number is even higher than that believe that. And if you start asking scientists like that are researching this kind of stuff, like, increasingly, they also believe that. They're like, yes, unless we turn things around rapidly, I mean, this is a very real risk. Okay, so even if we don't end up extinct, we're in for a bumpy ride in the next few decades. And there are psychological dimensions that we will have to face, right? Greta Thunberg's panic is not going away. Increasingly, you will have students feeling fear, anger, dread, anguish at what's happening, right? And they won't just be feeling things. People will start to also actually experience the real side effects of stuff. This is already happening around the world, less so in the UK right now, but things like food scarcity, disease, poverty, war, and economic collapse are all on the horizon if the unraveling gets underway. And there's no reason to think that it won't get underway. So added to this problem is that as teachers, you'll be faced with a situation where you'll have to support students going through something that is traumatic and difficult and painful. And yet you yourselves might be feeling that same trauma, right? I know this. I'm taking you guys into the darkness, not because not because I'm going to leave you there, because the second half of this lecture is about how do we rebuild out of this reality. But it is just a fact, and no teachers' colleges aren't preparing us for the fact that we've got some very serious emotional work to deal with in the coming decades. That last point right there, shows a little bit about how this interconnects. We talk about inclusion and social justice, but the ecological crisis will be affecting different students in different ways. Some of them will be panicking and terrified in more than others, and there's issues about how do you support diverse people who are attending to their experience in different ways. Some people, especially from poor communities, might be more negatively physically impacted by things like disease or poverty exacerbated by the crisis. So social justice issues might increase as well as a result. So all of the kind of pedagogical issues you've been learning about so far intersect intimately with what we might expect to happen with the ecological crisis. So what we're going to explore today in part is, if you do not work on these emotions yourself, you won't be able to support your students. How do we work on them ourselves? So to summarize the problem we're faced with, we're told by curricula, and we will increasingly be told that we should be including environmental and sustainability topics into our teaching. However, these topics they scratch open fear, anguish, anger, guilt, despair, grief, a lot of difficult emotions that we are not currently equipped to handle. We're not psychotherapists, we're just teachers, right? But we're increasingly going to be asked to teach things which might induce these difficult types of emotions that we don't know what to deal with. And even if we don't address them, they're going to be coming up anyways with our students, and they're going to be bringing them into the classroom. So in either case, we're bringing the issue of mortality into the classroom, which makes environmental education a topic unlike any other topic. It's not like with math or with physics or with literature or whatever. It's like you teach the topic, you teach the content, and if you teach it well, you know, in an engaging way, in a clear way, students will get it and your job is done. But with environmental crisis, you are like the rawness of what's going on is always under the surface. You know, so even if you just say in a blasé way, oh, you know what, there's an extinction problem right now, but look, kids, this is what we can do about it. It's like you're still triggering something more serious that is than any other topic, right? And this is probably why a lot of us avoid talking about these topics much in the classroom. So there's something which I'm going to call the hope and hopelessness paradox. So how this works. Some people say that we should communicate the problem as seriously and as honestly as we can, right? Because if you don't understand the seriousness of the situation that we're faced with, you won't take serious action. Okay. But some people say, well, you can't do that because it leads to hopelessness. You know, if people really understood the fact that we're already in this runaway thing and that like the worlds of our children is not going to be at all what we are in right now. It's like, ooh, the problem's too big. Oh, it's overwhelming. I can't do anything about it. And you feel hopeless. And then you stop acting. You stop engaging, right? So that's the fear that the truth leads to hopelessness. So those people say, no, we need to foster hope instead. That there is a possible way, that there is a future, that we can turn things around, okay? The problem with the idea of hope is that as soon as you tell people that, you know, there is a solution, you detonate, you deactivate the urgency, right? Oh, okay, well, somebody's going to figure it out. And it's always somebody else, because it's like, oh, you know, it can, yeah, and the gravity of the moment is just taken away. So there's a problem in that two of the main ways that we have of thinking about the ecological crisis and as educators are both fraught with problems. Let's go deeper. Okay, I'm going to explain to you a theory right now by social psychology, created by social psychologists, and it's called terror management theory. It's been corroborated in hundreds of different studies by now. It's there's a lot of correlational evidence for what I'm about to explain to them about them. Sorry. So the idea of terror management theory is that if people are reminded of mortality, they seek to flee it. And they flee it in two different ways. They escape either by seeking the comfort of their cultural norms, or by engaging in activities that boost their self-esteem. Okay. So the cultural norms are, in a way, felt as this sort of permanent kind of safety net that if you're reminded of the precarity or the danger or of your own death, of impermanence, that you want the cocoon of something that's safe and secure, and your culture seems like something that's more permanent and secure. So it's something like that. And the self-esteem part is just because, yeah, the higher your self-esteem is, like the more you feel like you're invincible, basically. So these guys have like come up with a whole bunch of really interesting studies where it's like, you know, totally counterintuitive things happen. It's like, if you are in a culture where like smoking makes you feel cool, like it boosts your self-esteem, if you're reminded of death, you're more likely to smoke, to escape the sense that you're going to die. It's like, you know, so because it makes you feel like, I don't know, like you're on top of the world in some sort of a way. So the cultural norms part is also interesting. And there's been studies that are showing the fact that, well, if you live in a culture that is consumerist and you are reminded of your mortality, then you will seek the comfort of your culture, which in this case means a consumerist culture, which in this case means that you're going to go out and buy something in order to evade the feeling of death, which means we could be teaching about the ecological crisis, make people feel for a moment that they are mortal, think that we're doing a good job by, you know, expressing the severity of the problem, and then, you know, actually push them to Zara's or H&M effectively, or to Amazon right now. We can, in that way, we exacerbate the problem that we're trying to resolve. And this isn't something that is consciously done. We don't even know that we're doing it. It's like in the studies that they've done, they've noted that, you know, they'll do a questionnaire of people, and like 6% of the questions will somehow like indirectly remind them of their death in some way. And then they'll give the same questionnaire to another group of people without the mortality inducing questions in them. And then the people will answer the questionnaire. They'll have no idea it has anything to do with a study about death or mortality and its effects on human behavior. Then they'll observe what the two groups of people do afterwards. And people will just naturally gravitate towards certain types of ways of seeking comfort without even knowing that they're doing it. This is happening below the level of consciousness. The point here is that inducing fear does not seem to be like an effective agent for change. And yet we live in a world where fear will be increasingly induced, right? By the way, neither is shaming. There's a lot of studies about that too. Okay, so now fear doesn't work. So now going deeper into this, but don't worry, there's a solution urge that we all have when we see that people are getting overwhelmed. This doesn't work either. And I am going to tell you a couple, I'm going to illustrate for you one of the reasons why it doesn't work. See here, this graph is an IPCC model of possible temperature change in the 21st century as a result of climate change. So we have the best possible scenario of a slightly more than 1 degree increase, worst possible scenario of an almost 6 degree increase in temperature. Why is there such a massive difference? Well, 50% of the margin of error is due to differences in how seriously governments take the issue and put it into policy. Okay? So if the governments took it really seriously, we might get somewhere closer to here. If the governments didn't take it seriously, we'd get somewhere closer to here. But the data that the governments are using to decide whether or not it's serious are graphs such as this. Right? So you see the feedback loop problem here. A government will look at this and be like, oh, look, it's not like, you know, a 6 degree warming is like at the very, like is very unlikely because that's like the top limit of what's possible. it's much more likely going to be somewhere around here. So, 2.5 degree increase. People are saying as long as things are like below 2, it should be okay. So therefore, we can institute some changes, but we don't need to do very much. But that very thinking, right, that there's a solution based on this uncertainty will lead to the probability that the situation will be more severe. There's also the psychological issue that for a lot of people, they just can't believe that catastrophes will really happen until they're too late. And so right now we're only seeing a small degree increase. We haven't seen the unfolding of any tipping points. They're like, there is no evidence, concrete evidence that the world is unfolding rapidly. If there's no evidence, then then there's nothing to impel us to radically and urgently change, right? But the problem is that once we do see that evidence, it will be certainly too late. So we're having to deal with an issue where we are relying on science as something that's giving us probabilities and uncertainties, and we have to act on that instead of like inductively gleaned certainties that have been achieved with some degree of robustness through inductive studies and that kind of thing. It's like science is being used in a different way, and it's more conjectural, but it has to be conjectural, and we have to take conjecture seriously. And people aren't used to taking science seriously in this way, in part because it is fallible, right? And we don't want to change if there's a degree of error. So this is called sometimes the doomsdayer's dilemma. And like one way of thinking about this is, if you are a doomsdayer and you say, look, the world's going to end unless we change seriously, and people change, well, then you're never proven right, because like the world never ended. So you will always look like a doomsdayer. We won't ever know if it would have actually ended had we not listened to you. Right? So the people that make the strongest claims are always putting themselves at risk of looking like fools in a way. Which is in part why a lot of people are express types of caution. They don't want to create that kind of feeling. So this is I'm gonna, like, this point, actually, I don't know if it should be on this slide or not, but if you talk to teenagers, if you talk to adults, there's increasingly a feeling like, yeah, the collapse is going to happen, but it's not necessary. But it has to happen. We can't change things, and afterwards, the world will be cleansed of all its evil, and we will be able to rebuild out of the ashes. It's kind of like a Noah's flood kind of vision of what the ecological crisis is. There's nothing we can do, but the collapse will come, we'll learn our lesson, and then we'll be sustainable afterwards if we survive. And this is called by some people cleansing collapse, that kind of an idea. Okay. Summarizing again, educators are increasingly expected to teach topics, but they don't know how to address the fallout of the topics they teach. Educators make decisions about what to include based on hunches and based on their own feelings of what they feel comfortable talking about or not talking about, and may avoid talking about certain topics, or may talk about them in ways which are counterproductive, may inject too much hope or too much fear, or other types of emotions that set out types of complacency or types of emotional experiences that are not what they were intending and not what they can actually manage. but not thinking about this in our pedagogy is not an option because it's coming for us. Okay, so here's where I will pivot into what what people are proposing as a way of working through this. Okay, I'm just going to give you. I'm going to give a 2-minute breather break, and before I get into this part. So let's give you 3 minutes. Okay. See you back at 10:21. Hi, everyone. Okay. So the next part of my discussion is based largely on the work of several people, but one of them is Joanna Macy, who she's an eco-psychologist. She's been working on how to transform the despair of the ecological crisis into positive action. And she's been developing models for engaging, and kind of activities for engaging people for the past 40 years. She's 90 now. And one of the videos which I've posted on Learn to accompany this is an interview that was done with her recently by a professor named Jem Bendel at University of Cumbria, who's written an influential article recently called Deep Adaptation. And it's also about these broad topics that I'm about to explore. So one possibility is to look at what doctors do when they have to give serious a serious diagnosis, let's say. So a good doctors are trained on how to give these kinds of diagnoses, but what they what they're told is that you have to be as clear as possible about the likely scenario, right? So if it is terminal cancer, you tell them that this is not curable. You tell the patient this is not curable. If it's possibly not curable, you tell them that too. And you are as honest as possible, because you recognize that giving them false hope is not a useful thing to do. And so it's interesting to think about, why is it not a useful thing to do? You know, like, why wouldn't it be better to just lie to this patient and tell them, you know, don't worry, you can deal with it. Yeah, we're going to be able to cure this, or something like that. Because why would you want them feeling like, you know, knowing that they're going to die? Wouldn't it be better for them to have like the remaining months or years of their life without constantly thinking about the fact that they're going to die? So why do doctors have a vow to be as honest as possible? And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in it, and I hope that it's made clear through what I'm about to present. The basic point, I think, is that when you face your mortality with honesty and openness, you can allow it to transform your perspective of yourself and reevaluate your priorities for how you're going to live your life, right? So when a doctor communicates that you are going to die to you, you have the opportunity of thinking, man, my time on earth is limited. How am I going to live my life? So I know this happened with my mom. Like, when she got cancer, she was given out of the blue a stage 4 diagnosis, and she quit her job immediately. She said, I'm not going to fight cancer. I'm going to live with it. And she started hanging out with her friends more. She started spending more time with us. And she said to me about 6 months before she died, you know, in some ways I'm grateful for cancer, because it brought me closer to my friends and to my family. I wasn't just, you know, before that I was, you know, working all day and then coming home and then watching TV and, you know, maybe occasionally talking to people or going out or whatever. But that it was just such a shake up. It just shook me up so much that it forced me to consider, like, what do I really value in my life? What do I want out of this brief, fleeting, beautiful existence that I've been given, right? So it increased a sense of urgency and a sense of gratitude for her. And I'm not saying that happens with everybody, but the point I think that Joanna Macy comes to is that it can happen, and it can happen if we're supported well by other people, and that we're given the space to work through these kinds of experiences. So that's what I'm kind of going to work through here. So if you have a child that is feeling grief or despair or confusion, you know, regardless of whether or not it's because something you brought up or because something they've heard on the news, or that, you know, their friends have told them or their parents have told them, or whatever it is, the point is that if you are part of the machine that denies those feelings, you're part of the machine that pushes them to also run away from them and to lead to things like what terror management theory talks about, jumping back into the comfort of the very culture which is destructive. But if you just keep the space open right? You don't knee-jerkly deny those feelings, but you trust that those feelings are there for a reason and that they're possibly good. They're possibly useful for helping that person understand who they are and who they can be in this world. Doesn't mean setting up a giant discussion in your classroom or something like that, where you like, you know, but it's just, it can just be little things that make the person feel like that there's nothing wrong about what they're feeling and that they're supported to feel whatever it is that they feel. Okay, so this is the idea that acknowledging these feelings and working through them is positive, but that by trying to deny them or bury them, we just lead to exacerbating the problems that we're in. Okay, so the positive role of negative emotions. There's a phenomenon called psychic numbing that psychologists talk about. And this is how they noted that people who experience trauma and do not work through it, or experience grief and do not work through it, are numbed not only to painful emotions, but to positive emotions as well. So why does that happen? Well, if we take the example of something like, let's just say grief, you've lost a loved one and you are feeling a lot of pain, but you don't want to face it. So that you overwork and you busy yourself and you do all of these kinds of things to try to not feel those feelings. Well, if we think about grief, it's like, why did the grief happen? The grief happened because you lost something that you loved. It's like, that is the painful side of a beautiful emotion. And if you do not open yourself up and allow yourself to experience grief and work through it, then you also lose your capacity to feel the love. Because feeling love is opening yourself up to being completely invested in something that you might lose. And if you haven't come to terms with the fact of loss, you aren't going to want to open yourself up as easily in that way. Right? So the most cherished emotions that we feel as humans, like the feeling of, the feeling of beauty and love and connection, these all, cannot happen unless you've also got the capacity to work through, the loss of these things, or in the fear of the loss of these things and all of that. So the negative emotions and the positive emotions are connected together in something like an ecology in the heart. If people feel grief at the loss of the world, the extinction of a species, the destruction of a nearby wood near their house, a stream or what do you guys call it here? A burn that you used to play in as a child, now buried. To feel grief at the loss of the world is a beautiful thing. It means that you have felt a connection with something that isn't you sufficiently that its pain, its loss, is also felt in your own heart as pain and loss. It's empathy, it's compassion, it brings you back into emotions that are so important for humans, and that are possibly unique to humans, that are in some way the gift that humans bring to the earth, the capacity to feel love and compassion. And these are the feelings that we need in order to support each other. These are the feelings that we need in order to fall in love with the earth and to care for it. Grief is evidence that we can still love. So it's not something to be hated. It's something to be understood and to be trusted. Grief connects us to the world and to each other. That grief is a connection with what is lost. It is a feeling of compassion for the world. It's the literal etymology of the word compassion is suffering with. And it is the experience of suffering with another instead of being bubbled into our individualism and that capacity to connect with the other is what is going to give us the energy and the power. But these difficult emotions cannot be worked through on their own. Okay, and we're dealing with a world where we don't really trust each other to talk about difficult things. Okay, especially in sort of Anglo-Saxon cultures such as Canada and the UK. Canada being where I'm from. There's kind of this like very this kind of idea that's probably like, bred by patriarchy, that like emotions are somehow weak, and that especially talking about negative emotions is a sign of weakness. But if any of you have actually talked about difficult emotions with another human being, you will know that there's something extremely powerful about it. First of all, other people can help you get through stuff, even if it's just by listening, by witnessing, and by supporting you just through being there, through sharing your experience. The other one thing is, though, that it's pretty clear to me, and I'm sure a lot of you have noticed this, that if you talk about difficult emotions with somebody, you feel closer to them. And they feel closer to you too. They feel like honored that you can trust them with something that is so personal. Right? So if children or each other, if we are all experiencing difficult emotions in the coming years as a result of the ecological crisis, this isn't something we can take on ourselves. These emotions are good because they connect us to the world, they connect us to ourselves, and they're good because they can further connection by cultivating types of relationships where we support each other more deeply, right? Because that very darkness, once we share it with others, it opens up intimacy and light. So we need to form communities as teachers of supporting each other and not try to shoulder the burden on our own in our rugged individuality and all of the other illusions that Western capitalism tries to propagate on what it means to be human. Another dimension of these so-called negative emotions is that they give us a clear indication about what we really care about, right? If you feel mourning or loss or grief, it's like there's your heart telling you right now what you really care about. We should be honoring that. We should be like listening to that in ourselves and in our students, helping them feel out where their hearts are orienting them in the world, what this means about their calling, their vocation, the meaning of who they can become, how they can meet the world suffering with the unique individuals that they are. If they don't understand what their hearts are really yearning for, they're going to be, they're not going to be able to find a job that's most meaningful for them or a hobby where they can connect with that, right? And a lot of the time, those painful emotions are like little indicators of where your heart is oriented. And so again, we should be honoring that and giving space for those experiences. A lot of people fear emotions, negative emotions, because they think if I go into this, I'll never get out. But emotions, as is suggested in the word itself, emotion, they're dynamic. Emotions don't stay still. If you let yourself feel an emotion, you will notice that it will it'll come, it'll fill you up, you'll go through all of the, you know, the turmoil or whatever it might be of that emotion, but it will fade away, right? And you will grow through that process. But if you try to repress it once you feel it coming, it doesn't go away. It sits there and it nags at you and it keeps coming up every so often, right? So to keep an emotion in motion requires you to let yourself feel it. And in that way, it will work itself through you, help you grow, and leave when it needs to leave. Okay. Overall point, negative emotions have a positive side to them, a very important side for us in our humanity and our work. Okay. Summary of what I had just said. If we don't attend to negative emotions in this way, terror management theory will assure us that people will continue to flee from these emotions as soon as they arise, and they'll flee in ways that are often destructive, such as consumerism and other forms of denial. If we do attend to emotions, we have a chance to connect more meaningfully with ourselves, with others, and with the world. The question is, how do we create communities where we can support each other in doing that? In the classroom, amongst teachers, in our families, in our relationships. Okay. Now, because dark emotions make our values clear, from them we can ask, right? Okay, I'm feeling this pain, I'm feeling this grief. It's telling me something. It's telling me about what kind of world I really want. If a collapse is likely, if the destruction is likely, you know, if the economic world, the social world is not going to be anything like what we thought it was in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, well, then it's almost freeing. It's like, well, then what? It gives us a chance to really think, what kind of world do we really want then? What do I really value? And it can give me a freedom to think that's what I'm going to work for. If there is a collapse, then the seeming stronghold on whatever the business as usual world is that we're living in suddenly loses its grip, right? The idea of collapse can be freeing and we can get to work. It gives us the chance to ask not only what do we want to sustain, but what do we not want to sustain, right? What do we want to let go of? What are we doing right now as humans? It isn't serving us, isn't serving each other, isn't serving the earth. What kind of relationships do I really want with people? What kind of job do I want? And how am I going to do that job in a way that really honors what my heart is telling me I need to do, and that honors the people that I work with, and that honors the world? What kind of more than human environment around me do I want? Would it be satisfactory if people solved global warming by genetically altering some tree species to sequester carbon more efficiently, created a massive plantation across the entire earth, brought down the carbon levels, climate change is solved, but everywhere you look is just a single tree species? Is that the kind of world, is that the kind of more than human environment we want? Right? What kind of world do we really want? How are we going to imagine the type of world we want based on what our hearts are telling us? So this is about reimagining the future. And this is something we can do in all of our subject matters in different ways. But I want to ask you right now to spend time later on today or tomorrow or something like that. Think back about those moments of your life that you thought were the most meaningful and the most special. How can we start aiming towards those experiences? To what extent do those experiences depend on all of the trappings of civilization? To what extent does modern civilization interfere
with the possibility or frequency or depth of those experiences? Is it possible that we're destroying not only life on Earth, but we're also destroying the human spirit at the same time? And if so, how should we live? How should we be as teachers, as colleagues? Really, to me, the question is, how can we flourish on Earth? The word sustainability, it's all about learning for sustainability. Sustain. Sustain is setting the bar so low. It's like, do we merely want to sustain business as usual? Survive, merely survive? Obviously we don't. We all have had experiences in our lives where we've known that that life is beautiful, profound, meaningful, right? Certain conversations that we've had with others, maybe a little silence that we had, a certain sunset, whatever it is. We've had these moments in our lives where we felt this, like that life is truly beautiful, but they're so far and few between. Why not aim for a world where we can have more of those types of experiences, where education aims to increase the beauty and meaningfulness of the world, where other species can flourish and thrive as well. And it isn't just about sustaining global economies and all of that kind of stuff. The thesis that Joanna Macy and others are saying is that we will only aim for that type of flourishing if we find a way of reconciling the dark emotions as well and transforming them into part of the beauty of what life can be. Okay, I'm going to end this with a little thought about, for example, what I would want. So for me, I would want to live in a beautiful and biologically diverse world without guilt or fear or shame that I'm destroying, because those things I feel they really gnaw me away. Where my essential needs are met, and so are the needs of all other human beings. And where I have time to cultivate trusting and supportive relationships with others. And where my work is something I deeply value and I feel contributes meaningfully to the world. Where I feel that the gift that I've been given of existing, I can give back and give a gift back to the world instead of merely being part of its destruction. That's the world I want to live in. When I've connected with the pain in my heart, that's what it's taught me. And when I've understood that, that's helped orient my direction. All right. So what can education do? How do we create communities to support one another and our students, typo there, through the suffering we'll inevitably face? How can our subjects be used to reimagine possibilities of how we could be during and after the likely collapse that will occur? How do we get beyond just doom and gloom or naive, optimistic business as usual? How can we start working towards those futures now? Not just waiting until the collapse happens and there's turmoil all around us and we're panicking and scourging and scrumming for food and whatnot, or whatever it might be. But how do we start working towards building those types of communities and resilience and regeneration of the human spirit now? What can we do today in our relationships with our friends and our loved ones and with each other right now? Anyway, these are some things that I'm inviting you to think about. I'd love if you talked about it with each other, like in groups, maybe find a partner, call one of your partners on the phone or whatever it is. Because as I said, I don't think this is the kind of stuff that you process in reflective journals alone. This is like, as a lot of these people have noted, like this isn't something that can be solved through individualism. It's solved through relationship. So That doesn't mean that there's not a place for you talking about any of the stuff that might have come up today in your journals. But I would encourage you to explore the stuff that you're talking about with people. Okay, I've posted 2 videos online that are by people who I think have chosen to face the darkness and have found ways to flourish in it. I'm inviting you to watch these videos and to reflect on them as well. Okay, so we've been through a lot. I've covered a lot of stuff today. I've done it in a way which people tell me is you're not supposed to do. Just have like an hour and 20-minute long Skype video is not how it's not how we're supposed to do distance learning. I don't, and I apologize for that, but we do have 10 minutes right now to kind of open it up for people just to share some feelings or thoughts or ideas that you've had as a result of some stuff that's come up today. You do not have to do this. You don't have to share. You can just listen if you want. But I'm opening up the floor right now.
Hey, Ramsey. Thanks for that. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. Lots to think about. I've just got a quick question for you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I totally agree with where we're at in terms of the ecological crisis. And I agree with what you talked about in terms of dealing with difficult emotions. Do you think that as teachers, it's fair to say we haven't dealt with the difficult emotions of the ecological crisis, but do you think it's fair to say we've always been dealing with difficult emotions around our students? For example, drugs, deaths of students, just really negative things that can happen in the classroom, which have always had to be dealt with at a teacher level. And do you think that, what is the difference between the difficult emotions of the ecological crisis and the difficult emotions that we might have dealt with anyway? Is it the fact that it affects everybody? Is it the fact that it's totally hopeless? What do you think the differences are there?
So I think that I don't. So I think that other people might have views on this.
Yeah,
My view is that there's not necessarily a difference.
Okay.
And that we need to get better at helping or supporting our students working through dark emotions in their own personal situations that may not be ecologically related.
Yeah.
What I'm focusing on here, though, as I said in that point about how grief tells us about what we care about and what and what matters to us, and it is our magic. It's like a magic connection. It's like a bridge between our individual isolated self and the world around us, other species, other people, and our possible purpose on Earth. So, I don't know if all forms of pain that people might be dealing with are also like that. They might be. I haven't thought about it that much. Yeah, so I don't have a full answer at all to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a good question, though. It's something definitely I'll be thinking about.
Because, of course, the implication is that as teachers, that this idea of connecting with emotions and supporting our students is so much broader than just the ecological crisis, and that we need a whole new, bigger skill set to do it really well across the board that nobody's really thought about teachers having before, is what I'm suggesting. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah. And especially in certain communities, you know, you're not equipped. Teachers College does not equip you to go into certain schools and certain communities at all.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's something we got to work on together, you know, and read up on our own and form like groups of other teachers and peers where we can like talk about our experiences, share, and try to grow and work towards it. You know, it is complicated though. Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts or ideas or feelings? John, by the way, what program are you in?
I'm a geographer.
All right. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I've got a wee question or comment.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for the lecture. There's just so many things about it that are interesting. I'm on the English program, but I have more of a question about science and about what the implications might be for the way that science is taught. Science as something that leads students towards empirical results as the main outcome. Yeah, I think that's my question.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I could expand a little bit. Like, I'm kind of inspired by like looking at the way that the pandemic, how government policy kind of responds to the pandemic, often several months after a situation has maybe been quite obvious, and that being because they rely on empirical science to justify decisions.
right. So this is the idea that an empirical conclusion is always kind of slow because it takes time to evidence. Is that the
Yeah,
idea?
absolutely. Yeah, and it's often like, you know, a politically charged kind of thing, but it can be used to kind of play down the seriousness of a situation, or we don't know how serious it is yet because we haven't proven it, type thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is a problem. I was trying to communicate that in a very clumsy way at a certain point in the discussion. How we understand uncertainty in science is an important pedagogical issue. There's different forms of uncertainty and they matter in different ways. And yeah, that's a good, it is an important thing. Scientists, are you listening? How do we deal with that problem? For myself, there's another problem, Jenny, and that's, I think that the sciences are predominantly geared towards technology, people getting jobs in an economy where they're making stuff and serving a system which is potentially, well, which is toxic right now. And so in my case with biology, because I'm the biology tutor, it strikes me that it is predominantly gearing people towards a biotechnological view where you're using other organisms to do stuff rather than more deeply understanding other organisms, how they live, how they say even experience the world, like seeing the beauty in the diverse biosphere around us. That is like, it's shocking to me how much that's lacking from the biology curriculum. You know, a beautiful, inspiring animals on the front cover of every textbook, but then you get into it and then it's just like understanding the mechanisms that we can, inside of life, that we can then tweak and manipulate for different purposes. So we're not going to be able to reimagine the curriculum entirely. We got to work with the constraints of what we're given. But the constraints are not so tight that there's not intervention points. And the question is, what are the intervention points in your subjects? How can you bring in stuff that you think are important for what you think is a flourishing, beautiful world? Yeah. Play the game and go beyond it.
So for Jenny, you're in English. There's a lot of people in the environmental humanities that are working on more than humanizing the curriculum, you know. So, and one of the lectures, the videos, sorry, interviews that I've put up to watch is this interview of Richard Powers by David Abram. And David Abram is an eco-philosopher, and Richard Powers is a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist. And he got a Pulitzer Prize for a book called The Overstory, which is broadly, it's a book where he's tried to write a book that recognizes the sentience of plants based on scientific evidence about, you know, how plants interact and communicate, and has tried to like create a story where plants are also protagonists in the story. And it sounds ridiculous, right, in one way, but like he pulls it off, and he got a Pulitzer Prize for it, for God's sake. So it's like, so there's ways in which all of our subjects can be used to foster the type of imagination that we need. And, you know, I would say that now is like, it's not a coincidence that in the sciences right now, in biology, for example, there's so many studies that are trying to show, you know, the intelligence of plants, the intelligence of fungus, the intelligence of animals, that there's like popular science books like all over the place, like The Secret Life of Trees, The Secret Life of this, that. It's like all over the place. Like in novels, people are trying to bring it in. It's like there's a thirst. It's like we've dehumanized ourselves and we've deanimated the world so much that like humans are yearning for a sense that the world around us is alive and mysterious and complex and beautiful in some way that we're not getting from the knowledge that has been given to us. And so that there's a rise in those types of experiences in our culture right now. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that's happening. And I think that will increase. So anyway, there you go. Oh, it's 11 o'clock. Well, thanks so much everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. You don't have to agree with anything that I've said today. I'm just throwing it out to you from some thoughts that I've had, that I experienced. And it's like, think of it more as an offering. You may reject many or most or some of the premises on which my ideas are founded. That's totally fine. Go on your own journeys, but you know, and know that, you know, if you do face some darkness, at least I'm around for you to listen and to share. Thank you all.